All right, welcome back to Study Hall, everybody. Today we're going to be tackling
Yeah.
a piece of legislation
Buckle up. This is a big one.
that could have some pretty big implications, I think, for all of us, just average citizens,
Definitely.
And it's called the Preventing Private Paramilitary Activity Act of 2024.
Straight to the point.
Yeah.
This one, huh?
Yeah, and we're really diving into the text of the actual Senate bill, S.3589.
The one you sent us?
Yes,
Yeah.
you sent this to us.
Yeah.
And I got to say, you weren't kidding when you said it was dense.
It's a bit of a doozy.
It's a long one, but
That's what we're here for, though.
yeah,
We're going to break it down.
exactly. To break it down to those bite-sized pieces,
Make it digestible.
Yeah, exactly. So just to kind of get us started, have you ever worried about, groups acting like they're above the law, like they're their own little mini armies?
It's a valid concern, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's what this bill is trying to get at. But it gets really tricky because, we're talking about
Well, for sure.
constitutional rights, the definition of what's legal and what's not.
Okay.
And I mean, this could affect so many things. Protests, security training.
Yeah, this is a broad one.
It's a big one.
Yeah.
It is.
So where do we even begin? This is so complex.
Well, I think the first thing is
Yeah.
who exactly is this law targeting?
Yeah.
And this bill gets super specific about what makes a private paramilitary organization. And that definition, it's important.
Right. Because we got to differentiate between, let's say, a group of friends who enjoy target shooting together.
Right.
And a group that's like getting ready, training to be, I don't know, like an unofficial police force.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Yeah.
And Section 2741, that's where it all goes down.
Okay.
They say it's 3 or more people organized, right, like a command structure.
Okay.
And they're training, they're operating, and they want to act like combat or law enforcement.
Out in the open?
Publicly, yeah.
So like those groups you see sometimes on the news?
Oh, yeah.
Dressed in camo, walking around neighborhoods, holding weapons.
That's a prime example, right? This bill is like, nope, we're drawing a line right here.
Yeah.
You can't just play army or cop without, actually being one.
Right, yeah. Okay, so if this were to become law, does that mean every group of 3 or more people who own guns are now
No.
considered...
Paramilitary?
It's not about just having guns.
Okay.
It's about how you're using them and how you're presenting yourself to the public.
Yeah.
Like if you and your friends are going hunting, nobody's going to think that's a paramilitary op, right?
Right.
But if you call yourself a militia, you're marching around with guns.
Yeah.
That's a whole different story.
Okay, so it's not about the guns themselves, but how you present yourselves publicly. The intent.
The intent, that's the key.
Oh.
And that's tricky. That can be subjective.
Yeah.
What one person thinks is threatening, another person might not.
Right. That seems like... And you can bet if this bill passes, lawyers are going to be arguing about that line for years.
Yeah, the courts are going to have a lot to figure out.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Case by case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, so we've got who this bill is targeting.
Right.
Now let's get into the nitty-gritty.
Okay.
What are the specific activities that it's trying to prevent?
All right, well, Section 2742, that's where they lay it all out, the no-nos.
Yeah.
And let me tell you, it covers some pretty serious stuff.
Okay, give us the rundown.
Right. First up,
Yeah.
no more public patrols or drills that involve, techniques that could really hurt or kill someone.
So if I see a group marching through town in formation with their, AR-15s, that's a no-go.
If they fit the definition of a private paramilitary organization, yeah, that's probably going to be a problem.
Okay, yeah, I start to see how this could get a little complicated. What about protests? We see groups all the time organizing, showing up in force, to make their voices heard.
Right.
Where's the line?
That is a big question.
Yeah.
And the bill does touch on that. Basically, it says you can't use intimidation or get in the way of people who are just trying to exercise their constitutional rights.
Okay.
So peaceful protest, fine.
Okay.
But if a group starts, getting aggressive, messing with people's right to speak their mind, that's where they might be crossing the line.
Okay, that makes sense.
But again, the courts, they're going to have their work cut out for them figuring out where that line is in real life.
Oh, absolutely.
Because, real life, it's messy.
Yeah.
It's not always black and white.
Right. Okay. So what else is on this list of forbidden activities?
Okay, well, impersonating law enforcement, that's a big one.
Oh, yeah.
No fake badges, no pretending you can arrest people.
Makes sense. That could get really dangerous really fast.
Exactly. People wouldn't know who to trust.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then there's training.
Okay.
These groups, they can't train for any of the stuff we just talked about.
So it's not just stopping them from actually doing it,
Right.
but preventing them from even, like, planning it or preparing.
Yeah, trying to nip it in the bud.
Okay, so this bill is pretty far-reaching, but
Mhm.
there are some exceptions, right? You mentioned that earlier.
Oh, absolutely. And those exceptions, they're
Yeah.
key
Yeah.
because they show us what this law is not about.
Okay, lay it on us.
Okay, so first off,
Yeah.
official military, National Guard,
Right.
they're exempt. Their training, their activities, that's all authorized essential stuff.
Yeah, no one's saying we got to shut down, the military.
It's about...
It's the unofficial stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Okay.
Then you've got things like historical reenactments, veterans marching in parades.
Okay.
We're not trying to stop those traditions.
No, of course not.
And what about student military training programs, like ROTC?
Mm-hmm.
They're good as long as the government authorizes them. And, they've got military instructors overseeing everything.
Okay, so oversight legitimacy, that seems to be the theme here.
And I'm guessing some security companies are probably exempt too, right?
Yep. If they're authorized by law to do paramilitary or security training,
Mm-hmm.
think of those companies protecting, power plants, government buildings, things like that.
Interesting. So it's not like a total ban on all private paramilitary activity.
No, it's not.
It's more about drawing that line
Exactly.
between what's legitimate and what's, kind of stepping over the bounds.
You got it. It's about balance, right? Letting necessary activities continue, but stopping the ones that could get out of hand.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And, with these exceptions, there are bound to be some gray areas.
Oh, yeah.
Like, what about a group that claims to be a historical reenactment society?
Right.
But then they also do stuff that looks a lot like the prohibited actions.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point.
Or a security company, they might overstep their boundaries.
So even with these exceptions, there's still room for debate and potentially some messy legal battles, huh?
Oh, tons.
Yeah, it all depends on how those terms are defined in real-world situations.
Exactly.
That's what makes this bill so interesting, from a legal standpoint, but also just from, like, a societal perspective.
Totally. It forces us to think about, like, what are our rights?
Mm.
What can groups do? And what should the government be controlling?
Okay, we've talked about who this law targets, what it prohibits, those key exceptions.
Yeah.
But let's say someone actually breaks these rules.
Oh, boy.
What happens then?
Yeah.
What kind of consequences are we looking at?
Let me just say, this bill does not mess around when it comes to violations.
Okay, so hit us with it.
What are the penalties?
Yeah.
Okay, Section 2742, that's our penalty guide.
Okay.
And it's tiered. Like, it gets worse depending on how bad the violation is.
Okay.
So, first offense, no violence involved. You might get probation for up to a year.
Okay, so first-time offenders, maybe a slap on the wrist, but...
And if you're a repeat offender,
Uh-oh.
fines, prison time.
How much prison time were we talking about?
Up to 2 years. And if you damage property while you're breaking the rules,
Oh, yeah.
those penalties go up even more.
And if somebody gets hurt?
Oh, then it's serious.
Yeah.
Up to 5 years in prison.
Wow.
And if someone dies because of this prohibited activity,
Yeah.
fines.
Yeah.
And you could be in prison for a very, very long time.
Wow, the message is pretty clear.
Mm.
Don't mess around with this law.
Yeah, they're not playing around.
Yeah. As I was reading this bill, I noticed this phrase,
Okay.
interstate or foreign commerce.
Yeah.
It popped up a lot, and it seemed a little out of place.
Interesting.
What does that even have to do with private paramilitary activity?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
It gets into, like, the legal nuts and bolts of the bill
Okay.
and how Congress can make laws like this.
Okay.
So when you hear interstate commerce, you probably think buying and selling stuff across state lines, right?
Yeah.
But legally, it's way broader than that.
Okay.
It covers anything that could affect trade between states.
Okay, so how does that relate to, groups acting like mini armies?
Well, Congress uses the Commerce Clause of the Constitution a lot to make federal laws, even about things that don't seem directly related to buying and selling.
Okay.
They're basically saying that things like the stuff prohibited in this bill, intimidation, disruption,
Yeah.
that can mess up peace and order so much that it affects interstate travel, communication, even like the flow of goods and services.
Okay, so it's a way for the federal government to step in,
Mm-hmm.
even when things might seem like they should be handled at the state level.
Exactly.
It's a legal strategy.
Oh, it's a classic.
Yeah.
It's been used in a ton of different situations.
Okay, that makes sense.
So it's not just about literally moving stuff across state lines.
Okay.
It's about how these activities can ripple out and affect the whole economy,
Yeah.
the flow of things across the country.
Right. Okay. So we've got this Commerce Clause thing figured out.
Mm-hmm.
But there are also these sections on preemption and civil remedies.
Yes, more legal twists and turns.
Yeah, break those down for us.
All right, so Section 2743, preemption.
Yeah.
It basically says this federal law doesn't automatically get rid of state laws about the same thing.
Oh.
So you could have a situation where states have their own laws about private paramilitary activity.
Even with this federal law in place.
Yep, unless the state law directly contradicts the federal law.
That seems like it could get confusing.
Oh, absolutely.
Different states could have totally different interpretations, different ways of enforcing it. Yeah. Okay. So then what are these civil remedies?
Okay, so Section 2744.
Yeah.
That's about who can actually do something to enforce this law.
Okay.
So you've got the Attorney General. They can potentially sue a group,
Okay.
stop them from doing these things.
Yeah?
They can even try to get a court order to make a group disband.
Wow. Okay. So they have some power.
They do.
And what about individuals? Like regular people?
So let's say someone gets hurt because of a violation of Section 2742.
They can sue the group or the individuals involved.
So if, like, a group's acting like a vigilante squad, harassing someone, threatening them,
Right.
that person could take them to court.
Exactly.
Wow.
And they can try to get money for things like medical bills, lost wages, even emotional distress.
Okay.
And this is important. The law says they can also get their legal fees covered.
Okay, so this is a law with teeth.
Oh, yeah.
It's not just defining stuff and saying, don't do this. It's actually,
It gives people a way to fight back.
yeah, it gives the government and regular people a way to actually enforce it.
You got it.
Wow. Okay, I think we've made some serious progress here, going from this really dense bill title to actually understanding what the Preventing Private Paramilitary Activity Act of 2024 is trying to do.
It's been a journey.
Yeah, a real legal labyrinth. But
We're getting there.
before we go any further, though, I want to give our listeners a minute to digest all this information.
Take a breather. What stands out to you so far? What questions does this raise in your mind? Think about that for a second.
We'll be right back with part 2.
Where we'll get into some of the real-world implications and challenges.
Yeah, the rubber meets the road.
Exactly. And we'll look at how this bill might affect groups like those private security companies and citizen militias.
Stay tuned.
We'll be right back. All right, welcome back to Study Hall, everybody. Let's jump right back into it. This Preventing Private Paramilitary Activity Act of 2024.
Back into the thick of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So last time we untangled all those definitions, those prohibitions
Right. Yeah.
laid out in the bill, and we looked at those exceptions. And then, whoa, boy, we got to that penalty system.
Some serious consequences in
Yeah.
there.
Yeah, you're kidding.
Yes.
So let's get down to brass tacks here.
Okay.
How would this law actually play out in real life?
Real world situations. Yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned private security firms, citizen militias.
Right.
How would it affect those groups specifically?
That's where it gets really interesting, right? The bill doesn't ban them outright,
Right.
but it definitely sets up a framework that could change how they operate.
Yeah. Okay, so walk us through it.
All right.
Let's start with private security.
Okay.
I mean, those companies are everywhere these days.
Oh, they're ubiquitous.
You see them at every store, every
Right.
event.
Yeah, and they do play a role, protecting people and property.
Yeah, for sure.
But there's also been a lot of debate about, are they being watched closely enough? Are they being held accountable?
Right. You see those stories on the news sometimes where private security guards use excessive force.
Yeah, overstep their bounds.
Yeah.
And so with this bill, private security firms, they're going to have to be super careful that anything they do falls under what the law calls authorized, paramilitary, law enforcement, or security services training. And when they're doing certain activities, they have to be under the direction and control of a governmental authority.
So basically, more scrutiny, more oversight.
Yeah, potentially.
Less freedom to just act independently.
That's probably where it's headed.
Okay.
The bill's trying to rein in anything that looks like, unauthorized policing or military stuff. You can't just be out there acting like you're the law.
Right.
There's got to be a clear difference between a legit security operation and something that, crosses the line.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense for private security. Now, what about those citizen militias we always hear about?
Yeah.
the groups that say they're defending the Constitution.
Yeah, that's a whole other can of worms.
Yeah.
This bill could really shake things up for them.
Okay.
Especially for those groups that are, doing arm training or patrols.
Right, because they're not official military,
Nope.
not law enforcement.
Right. We're going to have to walk a very fine line.
Yeah.
And remember, the bill, it keeps coming back to intent and public perception. If a militia group looks like they're acting like an unauthorized military force, they could be in big trouble.
So no more, like, armed patrols in public places.
Especially not without some kind of clear okay from, the government.
Right.
And it's not just the patrolling itself, it's even the training.
Mm.
They can't be training for that kind of stuff.
So if, say, a bunch of neighbors decide, hey, crime's going up, we're going to start walking around with rifles and just keeping an eye on things.
Okay, now, that's where it gets tricky.
Yeah.
It really depends on the details, How are they presenting themselves? Are they doing more than, like, a traditional neighborhood watch?
Okay.
There's lots of nuance there.
Yeah, lots of gray area.
Definitely.
Okay, so it seems like this bill could really change the game for both those private security firms and these citizen militias.
It could.
They're going to have to reevaluate what they're doing, how they're training.
Yeah, for sure. It raises a lot of questions about where those boundaries are.
Yeah.
Individual rights, group actions.
Right. When does the government step in?
It makes you think about the Second Amendment, too.
Oh, yeah.
The right to bear arms.
Big issue.
Huge issue.
Huge.
And this bill, it feels like it could just add more fuel to that fire.
Oh, for sure. The Second Amendment guarantees the right to bear arms, but it's not absolute.
Right.
Courts have said, yeah, there can be reasonable restrictions, and this bill, you can bet it's going to get challenged on Second Amendment grounds.
Right, because it's not about, like, banning guns altogether.
No.
It's about saying, hey, there are certain ways you can't train.
Right.
Certain activities you can't do, even if you're using guns.
Yeah, it's about the group activity.
Right.
If this becomes law, it'll be really interesting to see how the courts handle those constitutional arguments.
Yeah, could be a whole, like, reinterpretation of how the Second Amendment is applied.
He could.
Speaking of challenges, are there any other parts of the bill that you think might cause some pushback or controversy?
Well, you remember we talked about the Commerce Clause?
That whole thing.
Yeah.
That's definitely ripe for legal challenges.
Yeah, some people say the Commerce Clause has been stretched too far.
Giving the federal government too much power over things that should be left to the states.
Exactly.
And so with this bill, you could see arguments that it goes beyond what Congress is allowed to do under the Commerce Clause.
Especially if it's dealing with activities that are totally within one state.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got potential Second Amendment challenges, potential Commerce Clause challenges.
Right.
What else is out there on the legal horizon?
Well, there's the big question of how this law might affect protests.
Oh, yeah.
Political activism.
The one.
Because the bill says you can't mess with people who are exercising their constitutional rights.
Right.
You can't intimidate them.
Yeah.
So how do we make sure that people can still protest?
Right, and that legitimate protests aren't shut down just because, I don't know.
Right. We don't want this law to be used to silence people.
Yeah.
Or stop legitimate movements.
I imagine law enforcement is going to have some tough calls to make.
Oh, definitely.
If you've got a protest and some people are open carrying firearms, how do you figure out who's just, exercising their Second Amendment rights?
Right.
And who's crossing that line, into intimidation or even, paramilitary activity?
Yeah, that's going to be tricky.
Yeah.
It puts a lot of pressure on law enforcement to make those decisions in the moment.
Right.
And you can bet those decisions are going to be challenged in court.
Okay, so this bill, even if it's coming from a good place, it could have some unintended consequences.
It could.
And it could lead to some pretty big legal fights.
Definitely. It gets at some of the most fundamental things about our democracy. And the stakes are high.
Yeah, it really makes us think about, what are the limits of government power? What are our individual rights?
Right.
And, what even is legitimate force in a democracy?
Big questions.
Big questions. Yeah.
It's a reflection of, like, the anxieties, the tensions that we're dealing with as a country right now.
Yeah, it's about trying to find that balance between order and freedom.
Yeah.
Individual freedom and collective security.
Absolutely. And that's where you come in, listeners.
Yes.
We've been talking a lot about the details, the legal stuff, but now we want to hear from you.
Yeah. What are your thoughts?
What are your concerns?
Does this bill get it right?
This is just the beginning of the conversation, really.
Yeah, we've just scratched the surface here. We'll be back in part 3 to wrap things up.
Yeah, we're going to explore some hypothetical scenarios.
Yeah, what could actually happen if this thing becomes law?
So stick around.
keep those brain cells firing. Welcome back to Study Hall, everybody, for the final part of our deep dive into the Preventing Private Paramilitary Activity Act of 2024. We've gone over all those definitions, the prohibitions,
working it down.
those penalties. Oh boy.
Yeah, we've been through the legal ringer with this one.
Yeah, for sure. But now for the fun part.
Okay.
Let's put on our speculation hats.
All right, I like it.
And imagine how this could actually play out, in real life.
Real world scenario.
Real world scenarios.
Yeah.
So let's say we've got a group. They're calling themselves a neighborhood watch, right?
Okay.
But they're stepping things up.
Yep.
And they're starting to do these armed patrols
Okay.
because they think crime is rising in their neighborhood.
Interesting.
So under this bill,
Mm-hmm.
would that raise some red flags?
It definitely could. I mean,
Yeah.
they're not the police, right?
Right.
But they're out there armed, patrolling.
Yeah.
So are they a private paramilitary organization according to this law?
All right.
And are they doing this with the government's approval?
Yeah, those are the key questions.
Big question.
If they're not authorized by, the local police,
Right.
if they're not operating under their, guidance, they could be breaking the law.
They could be.
And it's not just their actions, it's also how it looks to everyone else.
Oh, absolutely. Public perception. That's huge.
Mhm.
If it seems like they're trying to act like they are the police,
Right.
that's a problem.
Yeah.
Think about it. If you saw a bunch of armed people walking around your neighborhood
Mm-hmm.
and they weren't wearing police uniforms,
Uh.
wouldn't you be a little freaked out?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Could make things worse, more confusing, more scary.
Yeah. Escalate things instead of making them calmer.
Exactly.
Okay, let's flip the script.
Okay.
What about a group that forms after, I don't know, like a natural disaster
Mm-hmm.
or some kind of big social unrest?
Okay.
They might say, hey, things are chaotic. We're just trying to protect our community.
Right. That's a really interesting one.
Yeah.
Because it gets to the heart of this whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
When is it okay to take security into your own hands?
Right. Because in a crisis,
Yeah.
people get scared.
Yeah.
They might feel like they have to do something.
They want to protect themselves, their families. But that can lead to all sorts of problems, too.
Right. Chaos, people abusing their power,
Mm-hmm.
maybe even violence.
And this is where the bill, it gets a little fuzzy.
Yeah.
It doesn't really talk about emergencies specifically.
Mhm.
So it would be up to the courts to figure out how the law applies.
Okay, so that's another potential legal battleground.
Oh, absolutely.
What about groups that say, hey, we're just exercising our Second Amendment rights?
Okay.
Like, what if they're just getting together to do some firearms training on private property?
Mm-hmm.
Is that, okay. Where's that line between individual rights and this prohibited group activity?
That's a tough one.
Yeah.
The bill doesn't stop people from owning guns
Right.
or training with them individually.
Okay.
But if you've got a group and they're organized and they want to act like a, combat unit,
Mhm.
even if they're doing it on private land,
Yeah.
that's when you might be crossing the line.
Okay, so a few friends going shooting.
Probably fine.
Okay.
A big group training for, paramilitary operations.
Uh-oh.
That's different.
Yeah. So much depends on the details
Mm-hmm.
and how people interpret those
On
details.
how it looks to everyone else.
Yeah, yeah.
Even if what they're doing is technically legal,
Right.
if it makes people scared,
Mm-hmm.
or if it seems like they're going beyond their authority,
Yeah.
that could be a problem.
Okay, last scenario, I promise.
Okay.
What if you've got a protest
Mm-hmm.
and the protesters are open, carrying firearms?
Oh, boy.
They're saying, hey, we're protecting ourselves
Mm-hmm.
from counter-protesters, from maybe even the police.
Okay, now we're getting into some really tricky stuff.
Yeah.
Because remember, the bill says you can't intimidate people
Right.
who are exercising their rights
Mhm.
and showing up with guns at a protest. That could easily be seen as intimidation.
Especially if they're, waving them around or something.
Right.
But what if they're just, carrying them peacefully?
Mhm.
They're saying, hey, this is our Second Amendment right.
That's where it gets super complicated, right?
Yeah.
The courts would have to balance all these different rights. The
Right.
right to bear arms, the right to free speech,
Mhm.
the right to assemble. They'd have to look at what's happening at the protest.
Yeah.
Is there a chance of violence?
Right.
Is everyone safe?
So this bill, even if it becomes law,
Mm-hmm.
it could lead to some pretty intense legal battles
Definitely.
and some really deep conversations as a society.
For sure, because it makes us ask, how much power should the government have?
Hmm.
What are the limits of our individual freedoms?
Yeah.
And what does it even mean to use force legitimately in a democracy?
Yeah. Big, big questions.
Big question.
It's really reflecting all those anxieties we have, all the tension, that we're feeling as a country.
That push and pull between order and freedom.
Between doing what you want
Mm-hmm.
and keeping everyone safe.
It's a tough balance.
Yeah, it is.
And this is where you come in, listeners.
Yes.
We've gone through the legal stuff, the what ifs.
Mm-hmm.
Now we want to hear from you.
Yeah. What are you thinking about all this?
What are your concerns?
What questions do you have?
We've just scratched the surface here.
We have.
There's so much more to explore.
So keep thinking critically about the laws that affect you,
Mm-hmm.
how they work, what they mean for your life.
It's important.
It is. A huge thank you to all of our listeners for sticking with us on this deep dive.
It's been a journey,
It has.
but a good one.
Yeah, a good one.
Thanks for being here.
Keep those questions coming, and we'll see you next time on Study Hall.